My home is where I want to grow old.
My home means everything to me.
My home is the heart of the family.
Home is beautifully designed.
My home is warm.
My home is where I feel safe.
My home is a place to build memories.
My home is healthy.
My house is carbon neutral.
My home is accessible. My home is affordable.
My home is where I feel relaxed.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Prestwich. I'm Director of Policy and External Affairs at the Chartered Institute of Housing. And hopefully you're all here to join me to talk about Homes at the Heart campaign. Homes at the Heart is a national campaign and coalition calling for a once-in-a-generation investment in social housing. And I'm very pleased that we've got all of the Homes at the Heart partners here today to talk to you all. So we have in turn Kate Henderson, Chief Executive of the National Housing Federation, Chief Executive of Crisis, John Bibby, Chief Executive of Arch, and Chloe Fletcher, Director of Policy at the NFA. So we're going to structure the session in the following ways. I'm going to go to each of the panel members in turn, who are going to speak to you initially with some remarks and some thoughts on what Homes at the Heart means for them and for their organisation and their rationale and their commitment to the campaign. And then after that, there's going to be an opportunity for questions. So as chair, I've got a couple that I'm quite keen to ask of the panelists, but really want this session to be interactive. So as much as possible, please try and get some questions coming through to us as the panelists are speaking and as they occur to you in the panel underneath your camera. So enough from me. And firstly, I'd like to introduce Kate Henderson to talk a little bit about Homes at the Heart, to introduce what the campaign means, what the coalition means, and the role that the National Housing Federation have played in the campaign.
Thank you, James, and good afternoon to everybody who's tuning into this session. I'm Kate Henderson, as James said. I'm the Chief Executive of the National Housing Federation, and we are the trade association for housing associations in England. Before talking about the campaign, I just wanted to talk a little bit, very briefly, about the response from the sector during the pandemic. And I think I've always been proud to work with housing associations, to represent housing associations, but absolutely never more so than over the past 6 months. The response, in particular from frontline teams, has been absolutely phenomenal, and the way that organisations, our members, have been working in partnership with local government, in partnership with central government, with business, with charities, to support residents during this time has really been remarkable. We've worked in a variety of ways. Three sort of core areas during the height of lockdown. Firstly was around keeping staff and residents safe. And all the work that's been going on there. And that's from kind of the front line of making sure that things like boilers can continue to be checked, but also through to things like ensuring that frontline staff have enough PPE equipment. We've also been working really hard with our members on protecting residents' incomes and livelihoods, working really closely at a national level with the Department for Work and Pensions, securing changes to universal credit, but also just ensuring there is that frontline support in ensuring that residents get access to the welfare they're entitled to at a very difficult time of change. And then thirdly, it's around sustaining critical services. And during the height of lockdown, that was particularly pressing, particularly for our members running care and support services, homeless hostels, women's refuges. The work's been absolutely remarkable from the sector, and we've played a small role in helping coordinate some of that effort. Really extraordinary times. And I think we're now in a situation where we are facing a recession, probably a recession that the likes of which we haven't seen before. Really important to recognise that this is not a fair recession, that the inequality and disadvantage is going to mean that some people are much more severely affected than others, both in terms of their physical but also their economic health going forward. And that's, it's great that John and Crisis are part of the coalition at the very sharp end. There's homelessness. We also really need to recognise that different communities, particularly communities from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, are having a disproportionately harsh effect from the pandemic and the economic impact. So our focus now is absolutely on recovery. From an NHS perspective, it's housing associations' role in recovery. But behind this is the role of housing in supporting not just the economic recovery of the nation, but also our role in supporting social recovery. And that's where the Homes at the Heart campaign has originated from. So in partnership with Arch and CIH and Crisis and the National Federation of Almos, we've brought together these 5 core partners, a coalition of 60 organisations, to make the case for a once-in-a-generation investment in social housing and putting homes at the heart of recovery. And through this campaign, there are 5 key priority areas. There's no return to rough sleeping, and I'm sure John will touch on the progress that's been made during the pandemic, but we have a long way to go. This also isn't just about street homelessness, it's about all forms of homelessness and the huge and growing need for safe, secure social housing. So our second ask is a new generation of affordable housing. This is about kickstarting the economy. This is around a massive job creation through construction and supply chains, but it's ultimately about providing safe, secure, affordable homes for people on lower incomes. Thirdly is around supporting people to thrive in their home, ensuring that there is dedicated funding and support for supported and sheltered housing. Probably the biggest, most positive thing out of the new Affordable Homes programme is that 10% funding for specialist and supported housing that's in there. Fourthly, around decarbonisation and a programme of decarbonising our existing social housing stock, but also huge progress needs to be made on new build as well. And last but not least is around change for communities across the country. There are already communities that are hugely struggling with post-industrial change, with change to the high street. In those areas, it's how do we support those who are most affected by the crisis? And actually, how do we create new jobs? What's our role as anchor organisations and communities of ensuring that our local economies emerge stronger as well? In terms of some of the campaign activities we've done so far, so we launched with a letter to the Chancellor with this fantastic list of 60 names, which ranged at the one end from banks and building societies right through to organisations like Save the Children and Carers UK. And that is because housing matters to everybody. I've done a few media interviews as part of this, and we had some great coverage on Channel 4 when we launched with some research. We also had some broadsheet coverage. And I think what's really important is sometimes when we're being, why are you asking for all of this investment in housing? Surely we need to invest in schools and education. Surely we need to invest in health. We're not questioning that. Of course we need to invest in health and the NHS. Of course we need to invest in education. But you can't have a good education and you can't have good health unless you have stable housing. And that's why we need to do all of it. We have also been building up the evidence base. So when we've done some of those news stories, we've had some really powerful research. Our research showed that 1 in 3 people in this country's health was affected by their housing conditions during lockdown. 30,000 people spent lockdown in a single room. 10% of people who responded to the survey, it was a YouGov poll of thousands of people, said that they'd had depression as a result of their housing conditions during lockdown. We can and must do better than this. So that's what we're doing with the campaign. And the campaign is positive. It's shining the spotlight on what investment in housing can do for a whole range of different activities. We have been doing Homes at the Heart of a Stronger Economy, Homes at the Heart of Making Ends Meet, Homes at the Heart of Living Well. And this week we're focused on a green economy. What we'd really love to anybody who's watching and listening, and anybody who watches this at a later date as the recording, is for you to get involved. We've had some great responses from MPs, but do engage your local MPs, whether it's your local councillors, your members of Parliament, whether you have a regional mayor. Engage them in the campaign, but also tell us your stories. So use the hashtag Homes at the Heart and share us your case studies, your blogs, your research, your data, the impact that your organisations have on creating safe, secure, affordable housing. It really helps us get that message across, both to politicians, but also to the public. So we're really determined that we need change, that there is a massive opportunity to have change, that together we can achieve change. But it would be great to have your support for the campaign too. And I'm now going to hand over to John, who's going to talk about, from Arch's perspective, around the role of local government and your involvement in the campaign. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Kate. First of all, again, just to echo Kate's comments about the response from the sector, and the response from local government particularly, I think, has been excellent. I think what it shows is how good local government is in a crisis, and their contacts on the ground with local people, local communities, I think has really brought home the importance of local government in dealing with issues of this sort as they arise. And we are, from an Arch perspective, we are delighted to partner with our colleagues to support the Homes at the Heart campaign and work with Kate and others. I think from my perspective, just a little reflection back to say that, let's be brutally honest, even before the huge economic and health effects of the coronavirus pandemic began to hit home, we were in the middle of a housing crisis in this country, with a housing market that, let's be honest, even the government recognised back in their 2017 housing white paper was broken. And we've not fixed it. And the problem is, I suspect that with the impact of the pandemic, that will just exaggerate those breaks in the way the housing market works. House prices were already unaffordable to many in this country, and they've actually started to rise again post-pandemic or post the lockdown. So there's concerns there. And the government, let's be honest, again, the government has spent over the last 7 years some £16 billion in the form of equity loans to help people onto the home ownership ladder through the Help to Buy scheme, but it's done nothing in terms of preventing house prices rising and that issue of affordability continuing to be a problem. And from our perspective, for those households that quite simply cannot afford to buy, the options are limited. Rents in the private rented sector are unaffordable to many. Even before the pandemic hit, there were over 1 million households on council housing waiting lists across the country. And at the end of March, we had 93,000 households who'd already been accepted as statutory homeless, living in temporary accommodation, including near 130,000 dependent children. And that's got to be wrong in anybody's book. But the problem is that could get worse. The pandemic has forced thousands of renters in the private rented sector into serious rent arrears. The government is clearly worried about this and has introduced an eviction ban, understandably, but that's merely putting back the problem. It's not solving it. And what I think our members are concerned about is that once that eviction ban comes to an end, we may well see a significant rise in homelessness. And that's a great concern, particularly when we have a shortage of social rented housing to deal with those households. Put simply, people are having to spend too much of their income on housing costs. It's worth reminding ourselves that the 2017 Housing White Paper revealed that more than 2.2 million working households with below average incomes were spending over 1/3 of their disposable income on housing costs. And yet we are currently building, last year we built around 6,500 additional social rented homes. That's clearly not sufficient. It's not enough. And from our members' perspective, although there's some encouraging news in the recent AHP, Theresa May's promise to build a new generation of council housing does seem further away than ever. And we've got to look at that seriously to work alongside our colleagues in the housing association sector. The coronavirus crisis has further highlighted the need for that secure, high quality, affordable homes, and for many people, the support to live in them. And some of the worst households that have been affected, the worst households affected by the crisis include low-paid key workers living in homes that they can't afford, rough sleepers, those thousands of homeless families in temporary accommodation, older people in unsupported homes, and families forced to live in poor quality, unhealthy, and often overcrowded conditions where the virus seethes and spreads like wildfire. If you look at the local lockdowns, many of them have occurred and are correlated with areas of poor private sector housing. And we've got to tackle that. And this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to do that. COVID-19 pandemic has once again brought the connection between poor, overcrowded housing and health and well-being into stark relief. A legacy of the pandemic has got to be that renewed determination to ensure that everyone has access to a decent, affordable home. Now, from my perspective, I recognise and accept that home ownership remains a genuine aspiration for many, but it is not the answer for everyone. And in many areas of the country, house prices and rents in the private rented sector are simply unaffordable to those on modest incomes or in insecure employment, and leave many in poor, inadequate housing with little disposable income. And 3 years on from that 2017 Housing White Paper, the housing market remains as broken as ever. And if we are to deliver on the Prime Minister's promise to unite and level up the country, then we have to fix that broken housing market and help to do so by supporting local authorities and housing associations to build substantially more numbers of socially rented housing to ensure that everyone has access to high quality, affordable homes built to excellent design standards. Now, the latest affordable housing programme announcement this week suggests that we will be able to provide 180,000 affordable homes through that programme over the next 5 years. But it carries a caveat with it, that will only be possible if economic conditions allow. And my concern is that the economic conditions might not allow that unless the government puts a drive behind the provision of more social rented homes. However, if we look at that, 180,000 of those homes, only half will be for affordable or social rent. Now, that's better than the current affordable housing programme, but really, I think most across the sector believe we should be providing somewhere in the region of 90,000 affordable and social rented homes each year, not over the next 5 years. Investing in social housing needs to be seen for what it is. It needs to be seen as an investment in the housing infrastructure of this country. And investing in social housing now at low interest rates will not only help tackle health inequalities, but will save the taxpayer money in the long run, and will provide an immediate economic stimulus, as Kate says, as we emerge from the impact of the pandemic. The huge economic impact of the pandemic on jobs, job security and incomes, I feel, is going to be felt long and hard into the future. And I suspect we will see a significant shrinking of the economy and many more redundancies and a move to more part-time and zero-hour working as we emerge from the furlough system. More housing at social and affordable rents will ensure that households have more disposable income to spend in the wider economy and or to save for that first step into home ownership. All these issues are reasons why Arch is supporting the Homes at the Heart campaign, and why I believe it is essential that, for social and economic and health reasons, we need to persuade the government to put homes at the heart of our recovery from the coronavirus pandemic and make that once-in-a-generation investment in social housing. So that's all I wanted to say for now. Look forward to the debate and discussion. And with that, I'll hand over to Chloe from the Fed of Almos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And good afternoon to everybody listening this afternoon. My name is Chloe Fletcher, and I'm the Policy Director at the National Federation of Almos, which is the trade association for the arm's length management organisations that councils set up with boards of tenants, councillors and independents to manage their council housing. It's a bit of a mouthful, but fundamentally we manage council housing. And I think that gets to the heart of what I wanted to say this afternoon, that we really believe that councils have a key role, both in planning and enabling those new social rented homes to be built by housing associations and other partners and developers and everybody locally who would be involved in that, but also directly building them themselves. And we're really pleased, therefore, to be part of this campaign in trying to raise the awareness, both at a political level, but also with the wider public. I'm really pleased that everybody out there, hopefully, is keen to join in and play their part and help amplify those messages across your local communities. The government has said it wants to build hundreds of thousands of homes in, places for a range of people in all different places across the country. But fundamentally, to achieve that, local authorities really need to be given the resources to deliver that ambition, to be the real placemakers, to drive that strategic ambition in their area and work with partners to get action on the ground. And I think, as John and Kate have both said, I think as the pandemic hit us in March, councils really came to the fore as those local bodies leading the action, and ALMOs and housing associations, charities and others all supported their communities, working with their local authorities to maintain those essential services, helping vulnerable people and housing and supporting homeless people through that time. All of my members have commented that what great partnership working went on during those weeks, especially at the beginning of lockdown. Everyone just got together, got on with what they had to do and did everything they could to keep people safe and keep essential services working. What we all want to do from now on is sustain those partnership working arrangements and continue to deliver for our communities. But what we can do in a pandemic and a crisis situation cannot be sustained without further resourcing and commitment from national government to allow us to do that. It really is time to recognise the value of social housing and local leadership and invest in it for everyone. We believe that by investing in council and social housing, government could help support those communities worst affected by COVID, as others have said, and kickstart that national economy for us all. Building many more social homes, ramping up retrofit schemes, tackling the building safety agenda, all of those things would immediately create new jobs, help build up local supply chains, and encourage innovation in technology that we all know we need for the future. And without investing in the strategic role of councils, we're not going to be able to drive those partnerships forward and really get the best out of our local working. We need to sustain that council leadership in the long term and sustain the wider work that we all do across those communities. My members, like many housing associations and councils across the country, invest in health and housing projects. They help people get into apprenticeships, tackle worklessness, and really engage their communities in whatever issues they're facing. That's why we really value this campaign and want to support everything we can do to persuade the government of what we really hold dear to our heart, that homes should be at the heart of our recovery. And I will pass over to John Sparks from Crisis to talk more directly about the homelessness part of this.
Hello, everyone. And well, thank you to all of the speakers before. I was just going to say quite simply, the reason why Crisis supports the Homes at the Heart campaign is that that investment in social housing simply is one of the keys to ending homelessness in this country. There is no doubt about that at all. And if there were any doubt in anyone's mind about the value of social housing, if you look at the report published by the UK Collaborative Centre of Housing Evidence just 2 days ago, they produce compelling evidence that social housing reduces poverty, improves health, and drives economic growth. So I'm going to talk about homelessness rather than all of those things, but it's I think just a truth that those things are good things, and those things are driven by investment in social housing. So with the right leadership, the business case is a no-brainer. I'm going to talk about homelessness a little bit, though. I'm going to talk about homelessness pre-pandemic and during pandemic, and the thing we're all hoping and praying for post-pandemic as well. If I just talk about where homelessness was before the pandemic arrived, there'd been a lot of work, a lot of action by the UK government in England on rough sleeping. We're one of the few eras that, if possibly the only era where there's been a government that has actually made a manifesto pledge to end rough sleeping. And before we went into the pandemic, according to the official counts at least, there was starting to be a small downward trend in relation to rough sleeping in England, albeit a small downward trend from historic heights, where the official counts were telling us 4,000 and 4,500 people rough sleeping in England on a particular night. If we go through a different method of counting, we've just seen the report that tells us about the number of people who were rough sleeping in London during the year 2019-20. So the year up to March of this year, so pre-pandemic. In the year before the pandemic, 10,726 people were seen rough sleeping in London during that year. That is an all-time high, and it was an increase by 21% from the previous year. So that's pre-pandemic. That's what's happening before pandemic. And overall, certainly for the last 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, the number of people approaching their local authorities because they had concerns about their homelessness had been above the 250,000 a year mark for 5, 6 years. So we can see there was a trend already there. If we look at our own analysis at Crisis, we calculated in 2017 that there were about, 2018, that there were about 160,000 households in England that were experiencing the worst forms of homelessness. So whether rough sleeping, sofa surfing, squatting, homeless in hostels, or in unsuitable temporary accommodation, and that was increasing. And I guess there's one other thing I'd say about pre-pandemic as we bridge to post-pandemic is if you apply the same rules and barriers and investments and laws, you're likely to get the same outcomes as the last time you applied the same things. What's going to be worse and is really frightening is if you apply the same rules and barriers and investments to an unprecedented increase in joblessness, an unprecedented increase in people unable to pay their rents, then we're going to see a massive increase in homelessness. So anyway, pre-pandemic, we had a trend where homelessness, however we measure it in England, was going up at a real rate. And that rough sleeping number in London for 2019-20 is just a real wake-up call, in my view. Record numbers of people rough sleeping on the streets of one of the richest cities in the world. Let's go into the pandemic. So homelessness during pandemic. Actually, we saw probably one of the most extraordinary efforts in peacetime, at least, between national government, local government, charities, housing providers in the now known as the Everyone In initiative led by Louise Casey. And what we saw was a number of things. First of all, we saw the astonishing number of 15,000 people who would otherwise be sleeping rough or in shelters or in homeless hostels with shared facilities, moved into self-contained, safer accommodation. 15,000 people in hotels, in some parts of the country, in holiday parks, in student accommodation, and so on. What really one of the most extraordinary efforts. But there were two other things that happened which seem important to me. One is there was a different framing of homelessness. Homelessness suddenly became seen as part of a public health emergency, rather than as a bunch of people who've made bad decisions or drunk too much or taken too many drugs or whatever stereotypes we apply to people. Suddenly it was seen as a public health emergency and therefore something that can be solved with the right inputs and investment. So I think that was extraordinary and needs holding on to. The other thing that was extraordinary was the ability of government to make massive policy decisions quickly and correctly. And the one I would point at is the decision made about local housing allowance. And we all know that in 2012, the link between local housing allowance and local rental markets was severed and allowed to drift down to the point where it was completely frozen in 2016. Crisis and others have been arguing for many years about remaking that link at that 30th percentile. The cost of that is over £1 billion a year's worth of investment in housing benefit. We'd provide all of the economic analysis to the government. And then one day in April, the government just did it. They just made that decision, a £1.1 billion a year decision. They made it only for a year initially, but they showed it showed what could be done. And I think that's possibly the most extraordinary thing that happened, was that massive decision. We counted the number of houses or flats or apartments in one city, in Edinburgh, which were available on the market for people who needed to pay rents at local housing allowance levels. Prior to that decision being taken, that figure averaged about 20 or 30 properties at any one time. Within a few days of that decision being taken, there were more than 300 properties available to people who relied on housing benefits. So again, we see the impact of these sorts of decisions. And lots of other things have been done by government, by local authorities, evictions not being enforced, increase of notice periods, investment in discretionary housing payments, funding for 6,000 planned housing units, including 3,300 to be available this financial year. So some quite extraordinary things have happened over the recent months. But of course, now it feels a bit like crunch time, because those things clearly aren't lasting forever. Clearly, people are on the streets again. And clearly that figure is going to go up, but it can be stopped. It doesn't have to be that way. And I think I'll get to social housing in a second, but there are a few things that could happen in the short term that would stop that massive increase in homelessness, or certainly in terms of rough sleeping. And they are a piece of emergency legislation to do four things. One is to continue that emergency accommodation, place a duty on local authorities with the funding they require to make sure that people are given the emergency accommodation they need, and they're not on the streets and in shelters and at risk to coronavirus. Make sure that everyone means everyone. Lift the no recourse to public funds status that stops some people from getting any homelessness or housing support because of their migration status. Even people who've worked and lived in the UK for decades and paid their taxes still have that status, still not allowed to get homelessness and housing support. Thirdly, suspend the benefit cap. That LHA decision, that local housing allowance decision, was extraordinary, but there are still thousands of people caught by the benefit cap. So having to make appalling decisions about paying rent versus clothes versus food versus heating as we get into the winter. And fourthly, keep protecting renters and landlords from evictions. And we need to make sure that that keeps happening beyond the extension of that. So there are things that can be done in the short term. And then, of course, there are things that can be done in the long term to tackle and end homelessness. 90,000 social homes per year in England, stimulation of the private supply and enabling people to pay for that through the welfare system, focusing on preventing homelessness rather than just mopping up the mess afterwards, and following the evidence as to how to support people when they become homeless or if they're at risk of homelessness. Critical time interventions in supporting people when they move out of institutions like hospitals or prisons or the care system. Housing first as an approach for people who have complex support needs as well as a housing need, and rapid rehousing following the evidence that says the less time people spend without a home, the more likely and more sustained the solution to homelessness will be. So right at the very, very heart of all of that is social homes, and not affordable, not shared ownership, but social homes at social rents, in terms of tackling and ending homelessness. So that's why I said at the beginning, we're very, very big supporters of the work that Kate and her organisation are leading, and we're proud to be part of that coalition. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. That was absolutely fascinating. It's some really impassioned pleas for why government need to place housing at the heart of the country's recovery. We've got some questions coming through, and I've got some questions as well as chair. But just very briefly before that, just wanted to focus on CIH and our involvement in the campaign, and really just to say that we think this is the right campaign, and what is so important about this campaign for me is that this is genuinely cross-sector. It brings organisations together to amplify that message. And whilst thinking about spending review, we may all have slightly different asks as we approach that. Fundamentally, the kind of core message for the sector is absolutely the same, and that's so important. The second very brief point I wanted to make about why this campaign is the right campaign and feels different to where we may have been previously is that we're seeking, and I think have to a degree succeeded, but there's always room for more in breaking out of the housing echo chamber. The supporters that we've had from across any number of sectors that Kate referenced when she was speaking previously, it is absolutely central to that. You know, we within the sector know that there is a housing crisis, and we think we know what we need to do to tackle it. Sometimes that hasn't always felt as though that message is permeated outside of the housing sector. So this campaign feels very different, and that is a real positive. Just in terms of the kind of questions for the panel, I wanted to go to Kate first, if I may, just to some thoughts on the Affordable Homes programme, really, and a couple of things, I suppose. First of all, what does it tell us about where government is on housing, and particularly on social housing? And the second part of it, is it a good result?
Oh, thank you, James. So, what does the AHP tell us about the government's attitude towards social housing? Well, I think the new Affordable Homes programme, if you look at the detail of it, it's a 50-50 programme. So 50% of the programme will go to affordable home ownership and 50% will go to rent. Within that, there is an explicit and strong commitment to social rent, and that is absolutely to be welcomed. If you think about kind of perhaps some of the political narrative 12 months ago, but certainly if you look back to 2015 and then what was in the previous programme, actually there wasn't that emphasis on social rent, so that's really welcome. There is a 10% in there for supported specialist accommodation. That is definitely to be welcomed. We know how vital that type of accommodation has been during the pandemic, and just how much of it we need, and what it does to people's quality of life to have the right type of housing at that time. So we have a programme that has a balance. We have a programme that talks about being able to deliver social rent across the country, but there were also some questions within there. So there are some other changes. So the social, any rent, but social rent will have a condition on it with a right to shared ownership. And in addition to that, the government has announced a new model of shared ownership, which starts with a 10% stake with the ability to staircase with 1%, and also the idea that the consumer would have a 10-year repair-free period. Now, we're going to look at the detail of this right now and do some modelling on it. But I think we do have some concerns about introducing something that's untried and untested at a time of huge economic uncertainty, where as a sector we're desperate to build, we want to build, we have a huge need for more social rented homes. And anything that's introduced that undermines market confidence, that affects viability, will affect our ability to deliver those social rented homes. So we'll look at the detail of that. I should also say, the other part of your question is, is the AHP a good result for us? And does it show that the campaign's been successful? Well, I think actually having the social rent in there and the support in there has had a positive impact. But I think we should see this as a down payment. It even says in the text of the Affordable Homes Programme, depending on market conditions, it could deliver up to 180,000 homes. Say you take 50% of those as rent, and in a really ambitious world, that 50% would be social rent. The maximum social rent you could deliver over 5 years would be 90,000. And we've just heard really clearly from John Sparks that we need 90,000 social rented homes each year, every year for the next decade. So it's a start, but it doesn't solve the whole problem. So the spending review is the next opportunity, and there'll be an opportunity after that. But this is about us making the case for a transformative programme of investment that would enable us to deliver those kind of numbers. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. So I wonder, Chloe, then picking up on that point that Kate finished on, if I could come to you and just maybe an initial reflection on the AHP, but from the local authority perspective in particular, but then thinking about part two, which is what would we want to see from government at a spending review? And then maybe after you've answered that, Chloe, I can come to the two Johns for their thoughts on the spending review element.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I completely agree with everything Kate has just said, and I think from a local authority and Elmo perspective, we're feeling very similarly about it. It's a great staging post. It's definitely a move in the right direction, but there are still we still want more money to be invested in social housing directly. And for us, we've got issues around the right to buy and the use of receipts, which have been hanging around for some time. The government consulted back in 2018 on making it more flexible, allowing councils to use more. And we welcomed all of the proposals that they made back then, and pushed for them to go further and to allow councils to keep all of their right to buy receipts and not give any back to Treasury, and actually invest them in local housing on the ground, but also to have the ability to alter local discount rates to make sure that they were in line with local housing markets, and that it's financially sustainable for councils to actually invest in new build, because nobody in their right mind will be investing in properties that they're going to sell at a loss in 3 years' time, and I don't know why the government think councils will act any differently to any ordinary company or organisation in that regard. As I say, we're 2 years since that consultation, and we're still waiting. So that's sort of one technical element and one of those barriers that we're still pushing both Treasury and MHCLG on. And again, like Kate, see the spending review as almost the next opportunity for Treasury to remove some of those barriers, so that our members can really go forth and make the best of the resources they've already got, but hopefully contribute to building up the building of homes if we get more money. So I think we will certainly be working with John, and John can say a bit more about this in our spending review submission, to push the Treasury on us, if it has to be an additional programme, an additional one-off kick-starting programme for the local economy, to help build social housing. And we're in the middle of commissioning, we have commissioned some research which we hope will be published in the next few weeks to help show Treasury the real economic value of such an investment in
so John, is John Bibby, is that a similar picture as far as your membership's concerned on this?
Yes, it is. I mean, Chloe's summed up. We're doing some joint work with the National Federation of LMOs on our submission to the spending review. I think just reflecting briefly on the AHP, I mean, we've got to remember that the budget for the AHP, the 12 billion was set, long before the pandemic hit. So it's not a response to the pandemic. as Kate has said, there is some good news in there. Certainly, it's a bit of a step change from the current AHP programme, which is coming to an end. The fact that 50% of the programme will go to affordable rented or social rented housing is good. Bit disappointing that there's no specific target in there for social rented housing, which we'd have certainly liked to have seen. The record on delivering new social rented housing through the AHP and indeed through the planning system, through developer contributions, is pretty poor. Let's be honest. It's about 6,500 social rented homes delivered. And I think what we've got to try and persuade the government of in our campaign is that things have changed significantly and are likely to have changed significantly in terms of the economy. We've seen lots of redundancies announced. They all tend to be in lower income levels. I don't see many bankers being made redundant at this stage. I see lots of shop assistants and workers on the front line being threatened with redundancy around the hospitality trade, etc. And those are the very people that will struggle. If you're in a household where you've got a couple, one working or both working up to now, and you've been able to afford your rent or your mortgage, if one of you is going to be made redundant or both of you are going to switch to the gig economy or 0 hours contract, that's going to be significant. And I think we've got to recognise that the picture has changed and is likely to remain that way for some time. So whilst there's been an emphasis over the last 10 years or so on home ownership and getting people onto the ladder of home ownership, I think genuinely that's got to change. We've got to look at ensuring that there is a supply of affordable and particularly social rented housing going forward over the next few years. And if you look back at I mean, I hate using the term that in terms of the pandemic, a war on the pandemic, but the impact on the economy is not much different to what we saw after the First World War and after the Second World War. Huge increase in debt, issues around unemployment, and what actually got us out of both of those situations was investment in social housing and rented housing. And we're not in a dissimilar position. It might be an unseen enemy in the virus, but actually the impact on the economy and the public purse is not dissimilar.
Thank you, John. So then, John Sparks, if I can come to you and just think, if we're in a couple of months' time, you're waking up in the morning, you're spending review, and you get your dream result. What does that look like for you? And I suppose, what do we expect if we don't get the dream result?
Yeah, I mean, I just before I answer that, just to pick up on or to build on the comment that John closed with there. I mean, I think the statement that we'll build lots of 180,000, whatever the number is, of affordable housing, if the economic conditions allow, I mean, it's just it is just a nonsense. Actually, if the economic conditions are bad, that's precisely the time that we should be building anything, but building affordable housing in particular. And we've seen time and again, major capital programs during recession to get employment going, and a major capital program which is affordable housing has even more of a benefit than a road or a railway or whatever it is that we might build instead, because not only does it provide employment, but actually provides places for people to live. So precisely the moment they need it. So I'm completely build on what John had to say there. In terms of the spending review, I mean, over decades, people have talked about what is the way to house people who would otherwise not be able to afford housing, and always the argument has been either you build social homes or you let the welfare system take the strain. And actually, there's a very good reason why the answer to that is both, and not either or. social supply, in particular, has a security and a longevity to it, which is really, really important in terms of people building their lives. But actually, it also needs to be the welfare system at the same time. And the local housing allowance argument is clearly one in terms of any logic. The question is whether it's continued after that initial year. But what needs to happen with that is and there's a very good reason for this. It needs to go side by side with some different treatment of the benefit cap. Whether it's removed altogether, I certainly think it should be suspended. But some different treatment of the benefit cap, because we're talking about people losing their jobs in massive, massive numbers. And with the best will in the world, an alternative private rented house or a social home won't necessarily come overnight when people lose their jobs. And removal of the benefit cap is particularly for that issue of massive job loss. So my wake up on the day after the spending review is both. Ask me an either or question and I'll say both, please. But for very, very good reason. Number one, that we maintain the LHA position at the 30th percentile and have a different treatment of the benefit cap, but that we also put in place the basis of the long-term solution to homelessness, which is that we keep using the number, but is that 90,000 or thereabouts of social houses, social homes per year for the foreseeable future, a decade at least. And final comment on that: we've done it before. We've built hundreds of thousands of social homes in a year before. We've done that before. And other countries in the United Kingdom are doing the same sort of scale, and they're doing it now. There might be smaller numbers, but for example, the population of Scotland is a tenth of England, and there was a couple of years ago where they actually built more social homes in Scotland than England did in a particular year. So it's being done in the UK, and we've done it before. So let's do it again.
Thank you, John. We've had a question from the floor, which I want to rather cheekily combine with a question that I had, and perhaps if I can direct this to Kate in the first instance. So the question from the floor is about how, at a time of unprecedented national debt, government can pour more money into housing. And I guess my part of the question is how, as a sector, then do we make our case when presumably there will be any number of other sectors, whether that's transport or whatever, who will be making similar cases to government to say we should be at the heart of recovery, and in a time of limited money, it should be us that you direct your money towards. And Kate, if we can come to you on that.
I mean, any government has to prioritise its spend, and yes, we are a country with mounting debt, but we're also at a time of incredibly low rates of borrowing, and we're at a time where the government has a decision to make around the kind of recovery that we're going to have, how they're going to stimulate jobs and growth, how they're going to meet society's needs. And also, as John just highlighted, actually, that challenge between welfare spend and social housing spend is, we don't want to be playing actually different sectors off against each other. It's actually getting the best outcome for places right across the country. So I think that there's a really solid argument for investing in social housing. There are arguments in terms of what it does in terms of boosting local economy. There's arguments in terms of skills, jobs, supply chains. There's arguments in terms of the other money that is levered in. This isn't just the state paying for it. The money comes from multiple sources, and those sources are looking for steady, confident places to put money into over the long term. Social housing is long-term investment. There's arguments to be made around savings to welfare in the longer term, really clear ones. There's arguments to be made about savings to the health service in the long term. So the evidence is there. I think the challenge, as always, with these statements coming up, whether it's the spending review, the next budget, is they're a mix of politics and economics. They're a mix of the politics of what headline you want to get and the economics of whether these things stack up and what they actually deliver. And I think the challenge is with making announcements is how quickly they can deliver. And I think our message back to government has got to be, yes, invest in hospitals and roads and all of those things. Those big bits of infrastructure will not deliver as quickly as housing. And actually, there are so many sites that are good to go, sites that have been identified, things that are paused at the moment where actually we don't have the confidence, we don't have the grant rate that the government can turn the taps on. Yes, there need to be work done there, but I think it is a much faster opportunity as well in terms of getting that return and that economic boost. So there's tons of powerful arguments that we can make.
Thank you, Kate. Chloe, I wonder if I could just come to you on the local government point here. And it feels as though the local government in particular has felt the squeeze over the last decade or so in budgets. How does local government make a coherent case in particular on housing and on investment in housing?
Well, I think going back to actually research that we commissioned some time ago with both the LGA and Arch, I mean, it's picking up on John's point, and actually investment in social housing saves the exchequer money over the long term. And now, I mean, we did an update of it just after Brexit because we were mindful of the new world we lived in at that point. And at that point, they estimated the savings would be between 100 and 300 billion pounds over a 50-year period. Now, the problem we've got, I think, as a sector, and is that obviously that's a long-term, horizon, and what we've got at the moment and we've had for a significant amount of time is our governments who've looked very short term, and the Treasury who are looking for quick wins. But I think post-COVID you've actually got that argument that you can have a quick win in terms of the kickstart to the economy, the getting on what they call oven ready projects, delivering and creating new jobs, but you will save the money that is spent on the welfare bill over that long period of time. Houses will be around for the next, the ones we are building now will be around probably for 100 years, but we will be borrowing for over 30 or whatever years for them. You have to look at it as a long-term asset for society, and I think we have seen, I think that's again the problem with the cuts in local government. They were made back in, when we started the austerity programme, and people don't really see that immediately. But when you suddenly faced with a crisis like we have had today, the last few months, you suddenly realise the importance of that local leadership and capacity at the local level to help deliver on the things that everyone in the community needs. We all need a safe place to live, and we all need to be able to afford that in order to participate in society. So I think we have to continue to make that longer term argument and hope that the Treasury, get that they will save money in the long term, but they will also have that short term kickstart.
Thank you, Chloe. I'm conscious of time and the fact that the session is shortly going to be drawing to a close. So I think I'll take this question from the floor from Helen Hall from Gateshead Housing Company, who said, "Isn't this a good time to bring back local communities with local shops and other local amenities?" And I think that absolutely is the case. And I guess what we would say when we talk about the campaign is that this is very much about placing homes at the heart, not just of the recovery, but at the heart of local communities in particular. Communities are having a really tough time of it at the moment, and sensible and well thought out and well designed housing can really help to regenerate town centres and communities that have been hit hardest by the pandemic, and indeed by the tough financial times that we've had for the last 10 years or so. So I think, Helen, yeah, absolutely spot on. This is absolutely part of what we're talking about here as far as the campaign is concerned. So with just a couple of minutes left, I think it's probably just time to look to wrap up now. So to thank each of the speakers in turn, thank you so much for a really, really engaging session. It's one of those subjects that, not just because we feel so passionate about it, but I think we could probably talk all day about this. For those of you that are interested, and I hope that's all of you, the Homes at the Heart of a Green Economy week is continuing. There's lots of stuff out there. from blogs to a podcast that I recorded earlier this week with experts in this area. So do what you can to get that out and inform yourself about some of the issues at play. So thank you all very much today. I hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of the conference.